Congratulations on your new KitchenAid Ultra Power Blender. You've made a great choice, and it's sure to make your time in the kitchen more enjoyable. You wanted an Ultra Power blender because you knew that KitchenAid had combined their reputation for reliability with an innovative new design. But did you know that KitchenAid engineered the Ultra Power blender with you, the consumer, in mind? It's designed for versatility, durability, and convenience. The only blender strong enough to carry the KitchenAid name. The wide jar, unique stainless steel blade, and powerful motor work together so efficiently that your blender will thoroughly crush ice at any speed without adding additional liquid. Even the Ultra Power motor was designed to make using the blender more convenient. The exclusive KitchenAid electronic mixing sensor detects when more power is needed and adjusts automatically to provide a steady, continuous blender speed. KitchenAid strives to make life in the kitchen as easy as possible. That's why careful attention was given to every feature of the blender. The blender lid locks securely with a quarter turn to prevent ingredients from splashing or leaking. Even if ingredients do spill, KitchenAid has made it easier to clean up. The clean touch control pad and sleek rounded base have no cracks to trap ingredients. No matter what's spilled, the surface can be wiped clean easily, and the durable glass jar is dishwasher safe. The power cord can be conveniently stored in the base of the blender. The compact shape with its wide jar and sturdy base makes the blender easy to store. Because the KitchenAid Ultra Power blender is engineered for versatility, durability, and convenience, it'll become a valuable addition to your kitchen. And because KitchenAid has paid close attention to detail, the blender will look brand new for years. And to top it off, KitchenAid is so confident that the quality of this blender meets exacting standards that if the KitchenAid blender should fail within the first year of ownership, KitchenAid will pick up the old blender and arrange to deliver a replacement free of charge. Now that you know a little bit more about your new blender, let's take a look at what it can do.
Hi, my name is Cheryl Walters, and I'm here to show you how to get the most out of your new Ultra Power blender. KitchenAid has developed 75 taste-tested recipes to complement your blender. You'll find these recipes in this instructions and recipes guide, which is packed with your blender. Today, I'll be demonstrating just a few of those recipes as we put together a healthy buffet from appetizers to desserts. I'll be pointing out some specific blender techniques and valuable hints as we go along to help you use your blender to the fullest. But first, we need to assemble our KitchenAid blender. It's very easy, but there are some safety tips that we need to remember. To assemble the blender, start with the jar upside down. Now, be careful with the blade assembly. The blades are very sharp. Put the sealing ring onto the blade assembly and place the blade assembly in the bottom of the jar, like this. Now, take the collar and twist it onto the jar. Now that we have the jar together, let's get the lid on. The lid also has a sealing ring, so place that sealing ring in the lid and press it firmly in place. Then just twist the lid with a quarter of a turn onto the blender jar. Now, uncoil as much cord as you need. Place the jar securely on the base and plug it in. Before we get started on the recipes, let's go over a few of the blender features. I'll use ice to demonstrate how you operate your blender and to show you how effectively your new blender crushes ice. First, put the ice into the blender. Then put the lid on, making sure that it's firmly attached. Never turn your blender on without the lid securely in place. Then press the on switch. The red indicator light will blink on and off, telling you the speed switches are activated. You're now ready to use any of the 5 speeds: stir, chop, mix, puree, or liquefy. I'll use stir to crush the ice. Notice the green light above the stir button will stay on. As you can see, I stopped the blender by pressing the stir button again. And you'll notice the red light is still blinking, so the blender is still on, and you can now choose another speed if you like. You can also stop the blending process by simply pressing the off switch. Never remove the blender jar until you have pressed the off switch and unplugged the cord. That's very important. Notice how I rested my hand on the jar lid before I started blending. It's a good idea to keep your hand on the jar lid anytime you're using the blender as an added safety precaution. You can remove the center cap of the blender lid to add liquids or ice cubes while the blender is operating, but again, never remove the lid while blending. Now that we know how to operate our new blender, we're ready to go. Let's begin with the soups and appetizers that will start your buffet off right. Gazpacho has become a very popular first course. It's best described as a cold vegetable soup. I often serve it as an alternative to a first course salad. To begin, place 1 can of tomatoes, 2 celery ribs, and 1 medium peeled and chunked cucumber into the blender jar. Cover the jar and press chop for 10 to 15 seconds until the vegetables are finely chopped. One thing to keep in mind when using your blender, don't overprocess the food. Remember, your Ultra Power blender does the job quickly. Always stop and check your ingredients after a few seconds. That way you'll be sure to get just the right consistency. There, my tomatoes and cucumber are chopped perfectly. I'll pour them into this large bowl and get ready for my second batch of ingredients. A good tip to remember when you're blending larger size recipes like this gazpacho, blend in batches. This will help you get the consistent texture characteristic of gazpacho. Now that we have the first batch mixed, put the second can of tomatoes into the blender. Add 1 medium onion, and 1 small green pepper, which you've already cut into chunks. Now here's where we add the herbs that make this soup so special. It's important to use fresh herbs when you're making gazpacho. I guarantee you'll taste the difference in the finished product. Add 2 teaspoons of snipped fresh parsley, 1 teaspoon of snipped fresh chives, and 1 clove of garlic to really spice up your soup and give it a great taste. Now add 3 tablespoons of olive oil, and 3 tablespoons of red wine vinegar into the blender. Cover and chop the second batch like we did the first. It will take about 10 to 15 seconds using chop. You may even want to use a spatula to scrape the ingredients from the side to really get all those herbs nicely chopped. This may be a good time to mention a safety tip. If you do use a spatula to scrape ingredients from the side of the blender, be sure to turn the blender off. Never place any utensil into the blender jar while the blade is moving. Okay, back to the gazpacho. Once you've got the second batch mixed, pour it into the bowl with the first batch you blended. Then stir in 2 cups of vegetable juice cocktail, a 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper, and just a few drops of hot pepper sauce. But go easy on the hot pepper sauce. We don't want to overpower our fresh herbs. Then stir this thoroughly. Look, we're all done. Just slip your gazpacho into the refrigerator until it's well chilled. I usually let my gazpacho sit for 6 to 8 hours before I serve it. Since soups are enjoyed by everyone, let's make a hot soup to complement our cold gazpacho. My favorite is cream of broccoli and corn soup. And for this recipe, we have to go to the stove. So in the interest of time, I've already melted 2 tablespoons of margarine in a large saucepan. After the margarine was melted, I added a 1/3 cup of chopped onions and cooked those for about 2 to 3 minutes. Then I added 2 tablespoons of flour. Now, that may not seem like enough flour for those of you who are used to making cream soups, but the great thing about using a blender to make soups is that your pureed vegetables add creaminess, so you don't need to use as much flour. After I stirred in the flour into my butter mixture, I added the broth, water, and the spices. A 1/4 teaspoon of both dry mustard and thyme along with a dash of pepper. I brought all that to a boil on the stove, and here's what it looks like after it's finished. Okay, let's add the broccoli. I'm using a 16-ounce bag of frozen florets. Make sure you put aside 1 cup of the broccoli to add later. Take the rest and add it to the margarine mixture. And let it simmer for about 10 minutes, just until the broccoli's tender. Now it's time to puree your broccoli, and this is where your powerful KitchenAid blender really shines. Most traditional blenders can only handle 1 cup of vegetables at a time, but your new blender is so strong you can blend 2 or 3 cups at a time with no problem at all. So, place 2 to 3 cups of your broccoli mixture into the blender. There. Now again, make sure that you place the lid securely onto the jar before you start your blender. Now press stir and blend the contents for about 30 seconds and repeat this until all of your broccoli is pureed. When you've finished, blend the broccoli mixture on puree another 30 seconds. Then take your pureed broccoli and return it to the saucepan. Now add the cup of broccoli you put aside earlier, 1½ cups of frozen whole kernel corn, and 1 cup of skim or low-fat milk. Just look at this, isn't it colorful? All that's left to do is to simmer the soup until the broccoli is tender, which I find takes about 5 to 10 minutes. This is going to be delicious. And by using the pureed broccoli to thicken the soup instead of flour and margarine, we have a healthier cream of broccoli and corn soup. By the way, you can puree all types of vegetables with your blender. To do it, mix the vegetable, cooked or canned, into the blender with 2 to 4 tablespoons of broth, water, or milk per cup of vegetable. Then just press puree for only 10 to 20 seconds. You'll have perfectly pureed vegetables, as simple as that. Well, we've made 2 soups for our buffet. Now we move on to the appetizer. Let's stay with our healthy menu and make a low-fat dip. My favorite is hummus dip. It tastes great and it's very convenient. I usually make it a day ahead of time. Cover it, put it in the refrigerator, and don't think about it again until serving time. Come on, let's get started. First, remove the stem and seeds from a small, fresh jalapeno pepper and place it along with a clove of garlic into your blender jar. Cover and press stir for about 5 seconds. Next, add half a medium onion and 1/4 of a medium green pepper. I've already quartered mine to make it easier. We'll mix the onion and the pepper using the pulse feature on the blender. Let me show you how. First, make sure your blender lid is securely attached and your blender is on. Then, before you select your speed, press the pulse button. The green indicator light above the button will glow, and that's how you'll know the pulse mode has been activated. Here, watch how I use the pulse feature to carefully mix these tender vegetables. I don't want to pulverize them. I want nice small chunks of peppers and onions. I'll pulse 1 or 2 times for 5 seconds each time until the onions and peppers are thoroughly chopped. Look how nicely the blender chopped the onions and peppers without over-processing them. All we have left to do is saute them. Now put the onions and peppers in oil with 1/2 teaspoon of cumin for flavor. I've sauteed some vegetables in advance until they were tender, and they're cool enough now to place in the blender along with 1 can of drained garbanzo beans. A note about garbanzo beans. You may have heard them called chickpeas or chechi beans. Well, they're all the same. No matter what they're called, they taste great. You can also substitute the garbanzo beans with cooked dry beans if you like their taste and consistency better. Mix the beans and onion mixture until smooth, which should be about 30 to 60 seconds. You might need to scrape the mixture from the sides for this recipe, but remember, turn your blender off if you're going to do this. You know why I love this blender? Because I've found that most blenders have a hard time with thick mixtures like bean dips and meat salads. But since I've been using the KitchenAid Ultra Power Blender, I haven't had any problem at all. Look at how easily it handled the hummus dip. Well, once your bean mixture has been thoroughly blended, place it into a serving bowl. If you like, stir in 1 small seeded and chopped tomato for extra color. There, we're done. Did you know that hummus is originally from the Middle East? I think it adds an international flair to your buffet. Serve it with vegetable dippers or keep with the Middle Eastern theme and break off pieces of cracker bread or pita bread. Your guests will love it. I think we've prepared enough appetizers, don't you? Let's move on to some really fun party drinks. You can't lose by serving margaritas. This is an easy-to-make crowd pleaser. To make your margarita, put 3 tablespoons of tequila, 2 tablespoons of triple sec liqueur, 2 tablespoons of fresh lime juice, and 1 tablespoon of simple syrup or 1½ teaspoons of sugar into your blender. I use a simple syrup instead of sugar because it makes a smoother drink. Syrup is just 1 cup of sugar and 1 cup of water that have been boiled to dissolve the sugar. Make sure your syrup is cool before you add it to the margarita. Once you've added all the liquid, put in 6 ice cubes. Cover the blender and liquefy using the pulse feature. Pulse 4 to 6 times for about 15 seconds each time to get that slushy consistency. Ice cubes vary significantly in size, so be prepared to adjust your blending time accordingly. This recipe yields 2 drinks. Before serving the margarita, make sure your glasses are chilled. And to add a special touch, dip the rim of the glass in lime juice and then dip it in salt. This gives you a true margarita. Enjoy. You can also easily make this frozen daiquiri with your blender. It's very similar to the margarita. You can find the ingredients and details in your instructions and recipes guide. I added strawberries to give my daiquiri a sweet flavor and this beautiful color. Now let's make a blender drink that works well with club soda for the kids or champagne for the adults, fruit sparklers. Today we'll use club soda. Take 1 cup of club soda, 1/2 of a cup of frozen strawberries, and 1 tablespoon of simple syrup. The frozen berries actually act like ice cubes in this recipe, so we won't need to add ice here. You can add other types of fruit to vary this recipe, depending on what flavors you like. Put all of the ingredients into the blender jar, cover the jar, and liquefy the drink until it's smooth, about 45 seconds. Before serving the fruit sparkler, I garnish it with fruit. Your young guests will really think it's a special treat, but they don't have to know how simple it was to prepare. Now that we have some fun party drinks to serve, let's blend together some homemade dressings for our salad. You'll find, like I did, that your KitchenAid Ultra Power blender is great for making a wide variety of interesting dressings and sauces. For our buffet, we'll make my favorites, raspberry vinaigrette and Dijon cottage cheese dressing. First, let's quickly put together this delicious raspberry vinaigrette dressing. It's unbelievably easy. Make it ahead of time, store it in the refrigerator, and just stir it before serving. This vinaigrette dressing is especially good with leafy green salad. It lightly coats the leaves and gives your salad a refreshing taste. This particular dressing also works great with fruit salad. To make the dressing, start by putting 1 cup of raspberries in your blender. I'll be using fresh, but you can also use thawed frozen raspberries. Add 2 tablespoons of sugar, 3 tablespoons of raspberry vinegar, and 2 tablespoons of oil. And that's it. Just cover and stir for about 30 seconds. Now, liquefy the dressing for 30 seconds. There, you're finished. I told you it was easy, and I know you'll find many uses for this delicious raspberry vinaigrette dressing. I do. Our Dijon cottage cheese dressing is just as easy. Here we'll use a low-fat cottage cheese. It's the key to making the dressing smooth. You can also substitute a ricotta cheese with this recipe, whichever you prefer. I like to think of this as a thick ranch-style dressing without all the fat. Again, like the vinaigrette dressing, you put all of the ingredients into the blender at once. Use 1/2 cup of non-fat or low-fat cottage cheese, whichever you like. Then add a 1/3 cup of skim or low-fat milk and a 1/4 cup reduced calorie mayonnaise. 2 teaspoons Dijon mustard, a 1/4 teaspoon sugar, and a 1/4 teaspoon dried dill weed, and a dash of salt and pepper. Cover and blend on mix for just 30 seconds. After it's thoroughly mixed, liquefy for about 20 seconds. Then serve over a tossed green salad. Doesn't that look delicious? I can assure you, you won't sacrifice creaminess and taste with this healthy dressing. As we move from the salad to the main course, we want to stay with our healthy menu. So I've chosen a flavorful pepper pesto. The recipe in your instructions and recipe guide has half the fat of the traditional pesto recipe. You may have avoided making pesto before because you thought it was too difficult. Well, let me tell you, it's not with your new Ultra Power blender. And we'll start by grating our own Parmesan cheese. There's nothing like freshly grated Parmesan. First, make sure the Parmesan is at room temperature. Then, cut it into 1/2 to 1 inch cubes. Put your chunks into the blender and push liquefy for 45 to 60 seconds. This blender does a real thorough job of grating Parmesan and other types of cheeses. I love to use freshly grated cheeses when I cook, and this blender makes it real easy. Once your Parmesan is grated, set it aside. Now you're ready to mince 1 clove of garlic. Put the garlic by itself into the blender and push stir for 5 to 10 seconds. Now add the rest of the ingredients. 2 tablespoons olive oil, 1 medium red bell pepper and 1 medium yellow bell pepper, each seeded and cut into chunks, 1/4 cup of loosely packed fresh basil leaves, and 1/3 cup of our grated fresh Parmesan cheese. You can also add 1/4 teaspoon of salt and a dash of pepper to taste. Blend all of these ingredients together on chop until they're thoroughly mixed, which takes about 15 to 25 seconds. Wasn't that easy? And the thing I love about pesto sauce is it's so versatile. Today we're using it over fresh pasta. Just spoon it over the freshly cooked pasta and you have a meal. You can also spoon your pesto sauce on baked chicken like I've done here to spice up your main course. You can make the pesto a few days in advance. Just make sure you store it in the refrigerator in an airtight container. Well, we've tackled the main course, so let's move on to everyone's favorite part of the buffet, the dessert, and I have some spectacular ones here today. Your guests will love this ricotta cheesecake pie. We'll use our blender for both the crust and the filling. With your blender, you can easily make your own graham cracker or cookie crumbs for a delicious crust. Simply break the graham crackers or cookies into several large pieces and place those into the blender container. Now, I'm using graham crackers here, but cookies work just as well. All you need to do is cover the blender and push liquefy. I'm using the pulse feature to get the desired texture for a crumb crust. Now, it should take you about 20 to 30 seconds with 2 or 3 pulses. That's how you make your own graham cracker crumbs. Quick and easy. So let's put together our crust now. Make sure your oven has been preheated to 350 degrees. Combine your homemade graham cracker crumbs with 3 tablespoons melted margarine. Then press this crumb mixture firmly into the bottom of a 9-inch pie plate and chill. I find that if you chill your pie crust before adding the filling, it holds together better. So I've made this crust ahead of time to give it enough time to chill. To make your filling, put 1 cup of low-fat ricotta cheese and 1 8-ounce package of Neuchâtel cheese into the blender. Make sure the cheese is soft. Now, pour in either a 1/2 cup of egg substitute if you're concerned about cholesterol, or 2 eggs, whichever you prefer. I'm going to use eggs today. After the eggs, add a 1/2 cup of sugar, 3 tablespoons of fresh lemon juice, and a 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla. Put your lid on and liquefy for 2 minutes. You may be wondering why this recipe calls for a somewhat longer blending time than usual. Well, that's how the cheesecake gets that silky smooth texture. Once you're done with the filling, pour it directly into the chilled pie crust and bake at 350 degrees for 25 to 30 minutes. To tell if a cheesecake is done, insert a knife into the center. If it comes out clean, your pie is done. You can take it out of the oven and let it cool at room temperature for about 30 minutes. Once it is cooled, refrigerate the cheesecake. Leave it in the refrigerator for 6 to 8 hours to ensure that it's thoroughly chilled. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised at the result, and you'll never think of a cheesecake as being difficult to prepare again. I've one last dessert to show you, and I've saved the best for last. It's my personal favorite, raspberry chocolate pie. Again, with this pie, we need to make a crust. I use 20 to 24 chocolate cookie wafers and a 1/4 cup of melted margarine. It's easy. You make it just the same way you did the graham cracker crust. But for this recipe, keep out 2 tablespoons of the cookie crumb and margarine mixture before you make the crust. The filling is what makes this pie so tasty. First, we need to mix together our gelatin. The best way to dissolve this type of gelatin is to pour in 1/4 cup of boiling water into the blender and then add 1 package of raspberry sugar-free gelatin. Cover the blender and push chop for about 1 minute before adding the other ingredients. When the gelatin is thoroughly mixed, add 1½ cups of frozen raspberries, 1 cup of non-fat raspberry yogurt, and ½ cup of low-fat cottage cheese. Then liquefy all of this for about 1 to 1½ minutes. Just look at how colorful this is in the dark crust. After we've poured the filling into the chilled pie crust, we sprinkle it with 2 tablespoons of the crumbs that we set aside earlier. The raspberry chocolate pie only needs to be refrigerated for 1 to 2 hours before it sets, and then it's one delicious bite after another. Look, we're finished. That went fast, and we've put together this whole beautiful buffet in no time. With the help of our KitchenAid Ultra Power blender. That was easy, wasn't it? I know your KitchenAid blender will become a favorite kitchen appliance. It certainly is for me. So go ahead, start cooking and enjoying fresh, great tasting foods and beverages with your new KitchenAid Ultra Power blender.
KitchenAid hopes you've enjoyed learning more about your new Ultra Power blender. We've certainly enjoyed showing you. Thanks for putting your trust in KitchenAid. Your versatile new blender is part of a long line of dependable American-made KitchenAid appliances. The Ultra Power blender joins the multifunction stand mixers and the durable hand mixers in the quality KitchenAid family of products. KitchenAid, for the way it's made.